We come at last to the triumphant second paragraph of the Discourse on Method, part 6. Let me see if I can just summarize this in one or two, maybe three at the most sentences, and then we'll do the reading, and I'll try to keep the commentary to a minimum. Part 3 of the Discourse on Method gave us a provisional code of morals, which has a lot of similarities to ancient Buddhism, ancient Stoicism, Boethius in the medieval era, and various other philosophies that were based on acceptance. So basically, life sucks sometimes. There's things in the world we don't like. There's things in the world that are terrible. And the path to happiness, the path to the good life, advised by various ancient and medieval systems of thought, is accept the things in the world that you can't change, can't hope to fix, and thereby achieve contentment. You can achieve tranquility and contentment by accepting the way things are. And that was the central aspect of a lot of these older systems of ethics. Descartes' Discourse on Method, Part 6, Paragraph 2, gives us a new code of ethics, which replaces this ethics of acceptance with a new ethics of control and change. How? By using science. I should probably clarify one other thing, with another pathetic failure to keep this to as few sentences as I'd hoped. The structure of the whole text. Part 2 of the Part 1 described how Descartes doesn't have knowledge, even though he had a great education. Part 2 describes his new method for gaining knowledge. Part 3 gave a provisional code of morals, sort of as a part of that method. The method was to banish error and build knowledge, but in the meantime have some temporary code of morals to live by until you can finish building new knowledge, but very much temporary. And then Part 4 builds the new knowledge, gives us the new foundations for knowledge, and then Part 5 gives us the new theory in metaphysics, that this knowledge establishes Cartesian dualism, and that gives us science, Part 6. Science using the word, the way we now use the word science, referring to the stuff physics and biology and astronomy are doing. Science, then, is the new agenda for controlling the world, and it replaces that provisional ethics of acceptance with a new ethics of change and control. Descartes says, I had never made much of the things that came from my mind, and so long as I had reaped no other fruits from the method I am using except my own satisfaction regarding certain problems that pertain to the speculative sciences, or else my attempt at governing my moral conduct by means of the reasons which the method taught me, I believed I was under no obligation whatever to write anything about it. You may take this as more false humility from Descartes. I think that's a very reasonable interpretation. It's my tentative interpretation. Descartes says, I don't make much of my own ideas. They're not that important. And if all I'm doing is trying to govern my own behavior and govern my own mind and satisfy my curiosity with certain philosophical questions, I don't really think there's any need for me to share my thoughts with anyone. So why am I writing this book? Because there's something else. There's something else important. It's not just the satisfaction of my own curiosity, etc., etc. I am under an obligation to write about this because my insights can give us a new science, which can give us a new way of being in the world, which can give us a new path towards the good life, the method of using science and technology, scientific understanding, and technological control to fix up the world the way we like it. That's my moral obligation is to share what I've learned in order to establish that new scientific agenda. Yeah, that sounds about right. Establish. I'm looking for another way of phrasing that. Establish sounds fine, but let me see if I can find another way of phrasing that. Descartes saying, I'm under an obligation to share what I've learned from my method of gaining knowledge, because that method can be the foundation for a new science which can give us the control we need to fix up the world the way we like it. And it's my obligation to do this, to help other people, because this can relieve suffering in life. This can make the world a better place and make people happier. Well, I'll skip a sentence or two and then read this part. But as soon as I had acquired some general notions regarding physics and beginning to test them in various particular difficulties, I had noticed where they could lead and how much they differ from the principles that have been in use up to the present. So, theories about how matter works, theories about the world, theories about physics, theories about what are the laws of physics and how do physical objects obey them. I noticed, as I was doing my research, that my ideas about physics were more useful. They were working better than old-fashioned medieval ideas about physics. So I thought I had an obligation to share this with everyone because this could be really useful. So Descartes continues, I believed I could not keep them hidden away without sinning grievously against the law that obliges us to procure as much as it is in our power the common good of all men. The common good of humanity requires me to share my discoveries because my discoveries lead to a more effective science. That's the point of this paragraph, and largely the point of the whole dang book. For these notions made me see that it is possible to arrive at knowledge that would be very useful in life, and that in place of the speculative philosophy taught in the schools, it is possible to find a practical philosophy. Make philosophy great again is sort of Descartes' goal here, but specifically make philosophy practical again, and not just speculative. In place of that speculative philosophy taught in the schools, it is possible to find a practical philosophy. That's a great way of describing science, what we now use the word science to refer to. Descartes is referring to here as a practical philosophy. It is possible to find a practical philosophy by means of which, knowing the force and the actions of fire, water, air, the stars, the heavens, and all the other bodies that surround us just as distinctly we know the very skills of our craftsmen, we might be able in the same way to use them for all the purposes for which they are appropriate, and thus render ourselves, as it were, masters and possessors of nature. When I read this paragraph, I easily picture Descartes laughing maniacally. Descartes in the role of the mad scientist in traditional sci-fi stories, you know. Descartes sitting in his lair, or his castle or whatever, and he says, we can be masters and possessors of nature. It's hilarious. Descartes is hilarious. Let me give a more slow, sober philosophical commentary on this. He's touting what we now call science as a new practical philosophy. What is this practical philosophy does? Well, it does two things. It knows how nature works. It knows how the physical world works. And using that knowledge, it has means of control of the physical world. Control by knowing. Maybe a good word for this is prowess. This new practical philosophy, what we now call science, will give us prowess we need to live well in the world. The knowledge of how the world works and the ability to control it, thus rendering ourselves masters and possessors of nature. And Descartes says, this is desirable. Not only for the invention of an infinity of devices that would enable one to enjoy trouble-free the fruits of the earth and all the goods found there, but also principally for the maintenance of health, which unquestionably is the first good and the foundation of all other goods of this life. For even the mind depends so greatly on the temperament and on the disposition of the organs of the body that, if it is possible to find some means to render men generally more wise and more adroit than they have been up till now, I believe that one should look for it in medicine. Now, this is astonishing. Plato, in Republic, has Socrates, I think it must have been Socrates, observed that the soul, by its own virtue, makes the body as healthy as possible. You want to have a healthy body? Start by straightening out your soul. This is the ancient medieval paradigm. You want to have a healthy body? Start by having a healthy soul. Epicurus, pointing out that if you want, well, I use contemporary language here. Epicurus personally never heard of ice cream, but the same principle would apply for anything else that we are tempted to eat or drink too much of. Epicurus will say, Epicurus, ancient Greek philosopher around the time of Aristotle, Epicurus will say, pleasure is the purpose of life. But if you want to have physical pleasure, you must not eat too much ice cream, because then you have a lot of pleasure now and then some pain later with bad health. What you really want is as much pleasure with as little pain as possible, which means you need good health, which means you need the virtue of moderation. A virtuous soul is necessary to achieve a healthy body. That's the old way of thinking. Descartes totally reversed that formula. This is probably really significant and calls for more commentary than I have time and brain cells for at the moment. It's really important. So Descartes saying it's desirable to make us masters and possessors of nature because we can invent an infinity of devices that would give us the ability to enjoy trouble-free the fruits of the earth and all the goods found there, but also principally for the maintenance of health. These devices will give us better health. Now, if like me, you are strongly inclined to be highly critical of this, I say proceed, carry on. But do be careful here. Descartes is giving us the agenda that gave us polio vaccines. Descartes is giving us the agenda that gave us these electric lights over my head here. Descartes is giving us the agenda that gave us the machines that printed those books. Descartes is giving us the agenda that gave us this nifty technology and this cell phone I'm recording this thing on. And Descartes is giving us the agenda for inventing electric kettles and so on. You're watching this video on YouTube or Rumble, right? You're using this technology now. And to some extent, this kind of technology does help. Now, you might quibble that maybe it's net bad. Maybe there's so much stupidity on the internet and widespread ease of enabling porn addiction on the internet that the internet is a net bad. I think that's a very serious hypothesis. I might even agree with it. I certainly think it's a serious claim. And certainly there are bad things that are enabled by technology. It's possible that this whole agenda is bad, that we're not supposed to be masters and possessors of nature, and you can criticize this from any number of angles. Theological, Marxist, and all kinds of other positions in between. There are various criticisms of this early modern European philosophy, Enlightenment attitude of making human beings into the masters and possessors of nature. There are all kinds of criticisms of this, and I would agree with any number of these criticisms, at least to some extent or other. The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. I think I actually wrote in the introduction. I'd have to pause and try to remember, or pause to open it. But in the introduction to this book, I think I specifically mentioned this paragraph of Descartes as setting the agenda for using science to control human nature, which is a very dangerous thing. And it's the sort of thing C.S. Lewis was talking about in The Abolition of Man. So I'm very down with critiques of this sort of thing that Descartes' talking about, but at a minimum, there's some nuance here. This is the agenda that gave us polio vaccines. This is the agenda that gave us chloroquine to treat malaria. This is the agenda that saved my life from, I don't know, some medical problem or other. Off the top of my head, I don't even know if I have any good examples, but I have very little doubt that my life has been saved by some vaccine or some medicine. I remember having malaria in '01, and I'm grateful for the pills they gave me to treat it with, although at the time I don't think it was chloroquine. I used chloroquine as malaria prophylaxis. I think they gave me something else to treat the malaria. Anyway, whatever. Actually, it was not taking the prophylaxis that made it possible for me to get malaria in the first place. Never mind all that backstory. Let's see. I'm going to skip just a bit. One could rid oneself of an infinity of maladies, as much of the body as of the mind, and even perhaps also the frailty of old age, if one had a sufficient knowledge of their causes and of all the remedies that nature has provided us. A very ambitious statement about how, again, this scientific knowledge of how the world works, plus a technical ability to manipulate the world to our advantage, a very bold statement of how awesome that will be, how many problems it can fix. For having the intention of spending my entire life in the search for so indispensable a science, etc. etc. Having the intention of spending my entire life in the search for so indispensable a science, he spent his whole life pursuing the most important knowledge, and he thinks he's largely found it, not in the airy speculations of Part 4, but in the new science that his philosophy is the foundation for. And having found a path that seems to me such that by following it one ought infallibly to find this science, unless one is prevented from doing so either by the brevity of life or by lack of experiments, I judge there to be no better remedy against these two obstacles than to communicate faithfully to the public the entirety of what little I had found, and to urge good minds to try to advance beyond this by contributing, each according to his inclination and ability, to the experiments that must be performed, and also by communicating to the public everything they might learn, in order that, with subsequent inquirers beginning where their predecessors had left off, and thus joining together the lives and labors of many, we might all advance together much further than a single individual could do on his own. Long sentence, as per usual, with Descartes. All right, that was a long sentence. Good grief. All right, let me try to paraphrase it and summarize some of this sentence, and then I'll shut up for the duration of this video and this week. What prevents him from finding, completing, or at least continuing in this new, most necessary of all sciences, the practical philosophy, or what we now call science, that will give us technological control over the world by means of knowing how things work in the world? What prevents him from getting this done? Life is short, and there's a lot of experiments to do. And so, he writes the Discourse on Method to give us a new foundation for this science, and to give everyone the basics of the metaphysics in Part 5 of the Discourse that's founded on this new knowledge, the foundations of knowledge in part 4 of the discourse. 5. Part 4, foundations for knowledge. Part 5, the new metaphysics. And then part 6, he's telling us, hey everybody, this is where we get science from. This is how we have a new foundation for that science, as we now call it, but practical philosophy, as he calls it, by which we can make ourselves the masters and possessors of nature. I think I've interrupted myself a few times. I lost track of where an earlier sentence of my own had begun. My own sentences get too long sometimes too, and I don't get them written down like Descartes. So I get lost in them. Let's see. Descartes is saying here, having reviewed all the problems with lack of knowledge, part 1, having reviewed the method by which we can get knowledge and the provisional code of morals until we get knowledge, parts 2 and 3, having gotten a new foundation for knowledge, part 4, and a new metaphysics that it supports, part 5, I can now tell you, good news everybody, this will give us the science, the practical philosophy we need to make ourselves masters and possessors of nature and fix all our medical problems and our mental problems and end starvation and poverty and fix everything else that sucks in the world using science and technology. And nothing stops me. Nothing can stop me from getting this done except the fact that life is kind of short and there's a lot of experiments to do. And so I wrote this book so that everyone else can also get involved in the same good work. I've given you the foundation you need to get it started, says Descartes. And now I'm running out of time. At some point I'm going to die, and there's a lot of experimentation to do, so I need some other people to join me in this good work of doing this science and to publish their research for everyone else. There. That's the triumphant second paragraph of the Discourse on Method, Part 6, replacing the provisional code of morals from Part 3 with a new code of morals based on scientific knowledge and technological control of the world. Thanks for watching.